Osama bin Laden owned Animal Crossing. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like it should be a joke or the world's worst conspiracy theory, but it is a true historical fact that Osama bin Laden owned Animal Crossing Wild World for the Nintendo DS. He actually owned 11 DS games, which we know thanks to a 2017 release of documents that the CIA published from his personal laptop drive after his death. These discoveries were kind of a minor phenomenon when this information came out. Like, there were a ton of articles online saying things like, Osama bin Laden was a huge nerd, or Osama the gamer. But weirdly, for all of these articles, none of them do any kind of further investigation. Like, literally, the Washington Post ran an article on one of bin Laden's games, and it's just 8 sentences long. Like, it's literally 8 sentences long, just basically saying, yep, he had video games. Isn't that wild? The whole thing is just treated like one of those random historical chestnuts, like that time molasses drowned 21 people in Boston. But there's not much in the way of further details. Like, if bin Laden's save files on these games are just publicly available, what's on them? Did he play these games frequently? Did he like them? Did bin Laden own the frog chair? These are the questions that I set out to answer 1 year ago. Okay, so for context, these games were published as part of the November 2017 release of Abbottabad compound material, a tranche of files that the CIA recovered from the hard drive of Osama bin Laden's laptop. The Abbottabad compound was where bin Laden ultimately fled to after the 9/11 attacks, and also where he was killed. Alongside the files themselves, the CIA helpfully published a list of all the file names, which I looked at before I committed to downloading them. You see, if you pirate as many games as I do, you know that the name of a save file can tell you a lot about its origin. There are tags in the name indicating what region the game was made for, what language, who originally extracted the game off a DS cartridge, all kinds of stuff. We can actually trace the entire history of these games from game developer to piracy site to terrorist, which is the strangest supply chain that I've ever heard. So from these titles, it seems like bin Laden's games were mostly multi-language releases, which were probably played in English, and the games themselves are from all over, US, Europe, Japan, etc. We also know that at least one of these games was ripped by Trashman, a popular DS ripper who probably lived in the US. What's also interesting is what we don't see in this list. There are plenty of save files from the emulated games, but none of the DS ROMs themselves. So if you don't know, the ROM file stores the actual game, and then the save file stores your specific progress. But the CIA has a policy against releasing copyrighted information, and a lot of the music and assets on these games were copyrighted, so I assume they were most likely redacted. Luckily, the save files should be all that I need, but downloading them was a struggle unto itself. You see, the CIA doesn't let you download all the files individually. You can only download them by category. So I went to download the documents category, and that download doesn't even seem to work anymore. Luckily, the Internet Archive uploaded a duplicate of them, and that download actually works, but the Internet Archive doesn't let you download the different categories, which means I had to download all 300 gigabytes of Osama bin Laden's laptop drive onto mine just to get the 11 files that I wanted. It wasn't super easy or fun, and now a third of my laptop contains terrorist materials, but I got what I wanted. I might be on the no-fly list now, but at least I got something even more valuable. Yoshi's Island DS. I mean, literally, while I was recording this, I got a message from my computer saying that I need to clear out space because I have 300 gigabytes of terrorist materials on my laptop that I still haven't deleted yet. I'm waiting for it to be over before I delete it. But at least now I have his games on my computer. Just a moment to be serious before we keep going, I would like to point out that I am dealing with the personal hard drive of a terrorist and a murderer, a man who is responsible for thousands of deaths. I am not particularly interested in snooping around, apart from these games specifically. There's a file, for instance, just called Jews.jpg on his hard drive. Don't really want to know what that's a photo of. Anyways, I downloaded the files as one big zip, so I wanted to use an unzip utility on my computer to extract just the files I was interested in. I was worried at first because my unzip utility told me that the save files were all hidden or missing, but as a last resort I tried extracting the entire folder that the games were in, and once I did, there they were. I even found something that I didn't expect, a ROM for GTA Chinatown Wars. Again, I thought all the ROMs had been removed for copyright, but I guess there was some reason that they skipped over Chinatown Wars. But I do find it funny that for all the government PSAs about piracy, it is now technically possible to get pirated games from CIA declassified documents. Because I had to extract the entire directory where these files were, I also got a little bit more than I was expecting. The CIA seems to have removed the original file structure and instead organized everything by user. So when I extracted the folder with all the games in it, I actually got every file on the account of whoever played these games. That includes some Flash games and a bootleg copy of an anime called Detective Conan, subbed in Arabic. With all the media hype around Osama bin Laden being a huge gamer nerd, I was worried that there might be some important context being lost in the shuffle. But this was as clear of a confirmation as I was going to get. Osama bin Laden did not play these games. One of his children did. It really seems pretty clear now. These games are on an account with a bunch of other media clearly meant for kids and with no terrorist material. It seems I was right about the media not looking into the subject enough and just running to publish Osama is a weeaboo headlines. But I still wanted to see what these files had, so I loaded up a ROM of Mario & Luigi Partners in Time, then plopped in the bin Laden save file, and I got an error. Now, I was using Dismume to emulate these games, but it looked like the save files were actually made in no cache GBA, so I went to a Windows machine and I tried it again using that emulator, but no dice. Still got an error. Just to make extra sure that it wasn't an issue with my ROMs, since I fortuitously had that copy of Chinatown Wars, I took the bin Laden save file, I loaded it up on the bin Laden ROM with no cache GBA in the exact circumstances that I believe these save files were originally played, and I still got an error. But I had come this far, and I certainly was not going to give up now. I'd worked with DS ROMs before, I can figure out DS save files, it's not impossible to patch up some small corrupted bits and then nurse these files back to health, if that's the case. I opened up like 5 different guides on DS save file formats, I generated some test save files to compare against, but then I looked into the bin Laden files, and the problem was pretty obvious. Yeah, you don't need to be an expert in DS file formats to know that files shouldn't just be blank. Like literally just an uninterrupted stream of zeros and then an uninterrupted stream of ones. Basically, yeah, these files are blank. There's some text scattered in them, but it's mostly just references to the titles of games, not anything that could actually be used to represent a game state. It's weird because these files are the exact length that you would want a DS save file to be, and they're just empty. For comparison, this is what a real DS save file looks like, and then this is what the bin Laden files look like. They weren't even like real files, they were like fossils of files. I was totally at a loss to explain it. I mean, did the save files contain copyrighted material maybe that the CIA blanked out? Possibly, but they didn't blank out on anything else that I saw. The Chinatown Wars ROM works fine, just not with the included save files, and it doesn't make sense to store copyrighted graphics or music in the save files anyways. Did the original owner just screw up the files themselves? I can't imagine why. Did no cache GBA just produce a busted save on its own? I mean, I can't find any bug report about a problem like this. No cache GBA can produce compressed saves, but that's not what this was like at all. But regardless of the reason, it seems like these files were just totally useless. I was kind of hitting a dead end, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. I was determined to figure out what had happened to these files, and my technical knowledge was kind of failing me, so I decided to take a course on computer forensics at Arizona State University. This is not a joke. I spent a semester taking computer forensics, both because I was interested in the topic itself, but also just to answer this specific question. Huge shout out to Dr. Beck, by the way, who was a great professor. For those who don't know, computer forensics is the science of tracing the history of files and other kinds of digital evidence. And I'm certainly no expert in it after just one class, but I do think I've learned enough to give a clear account of what happened here. Remember, the first suspicious thing that happened when I was recovering these files is that my unzip utility wouldn't recognize them. I now think that happened because these files were hidden and deleted. Now, normally when you delete a file, you're really only deleting the reference to the file. The actual data is still there. The computer just treats it like it's empty space, and then it can write over it. That means if you're a forensic scientist, it's possible to find deleted files again, so long as they haven't been totally written over. I think that these files were deleted by someone using a laptop, partially overwritten in some way, and then recovered by forensics experts at the CIA. I'm not totally sure why they were overwritten, especially because they were partially but not fully overwritten. Although, I mean, who knows what kind of security measures bin Laden employed on his laptop. Ultimately, though, it seems pretty clear that these files were just blanked out. recover the original content, unfortunately, would be basically impossible. Again, I'm not an expert in digital forensics, but it's also been a full year since I started looking into these files, and I'm pretty comfortable leaving it here. Almost. See, when I was stuck on the technical side of things, I decided to investigate a little bit more on the historical side of things. I reached out to a couple of historians and experts in bin Laden's life. One of the people I emailed with was Peter Bergen, who's a journalist and a history professor. He wrote a book about bin Laden called Manhunt that was later adapted into an Emmy-winning HBO documentary. He is, in the world of Osama bin Laden biographers, pretty much the biggest fish in the pond. The biggest fish in the Osama bin Laden biographer pond. To my surprise, he actually got back to me, and while his email itself was short, he attached a few files that were extremely helpful. I learned a lot, such as the fact that there was actually no internet at the Abbottabad facility. In order to obtain any of these files, they had to be specifically ordered for. That means even if bin Laden himself didn't play these games, he probably specifically requested them through a network of couriers that he had operating in Pakistan. One of these couriers would have downloaded the game somewhere else and then brought a copy to him. Professor Bergen also suggested that I buy a copy of his book, but I didn't. I pirated it instead. But I mean, if it's okay with the CIA, I was also curious if there was something in these documents that could help me identify which of bin Laden's children was the one to play these games. Unfortunately, that's another question we might have to leave unresolved for now. We don't know much about bin Laden's children. We don't even know for sure how many he had. It could have been as few as 22 or as many as 26, so it's not like there's only a few options either. His children did range in age. His oldest was probably in his mid-30s around the time these games were played, and so he's probably not the user. You can also narrow it down based on who was actually at the Abbottabad facility, but again, we don't have a lot of info on the specific movements of these kids. From what I've gathered, I think the person playing these games was one of bin Laden's younger children, aged 7 to 15 in 2010, which actually makes them about my age. So that's what I found, and I think that's where I'm going to leave it. When I started this whole research project, it was with the goal of understanding why Osama bin Laden was playing DS games. That was just such a bizarre, such an incompatible with reality idea that I couldn't leave it there. But the truth that I did uncover is almost more strange, simply because it's more mundane. Yeah, it's weird to think that the most notorious terrorist in history was playing anime games, and that's kind of funny, but it's chilling in a way that I can't exactly articulate that while I was getting stuck on World 2 of New Super Mario Bros., there was another child halfway across the world in a bunker hidden from the US government, and yet he was also stuck on the second world of New Super Mario Bros. I mean, can you imagine being a 10-year-old being raised by the most notorious terrorist in history and yet still being a 10-year-old? Can you imagine that your dad runs a terror cell and yet he still gets you video games and anime? The reason that the picture of bin Laden playing video games was so strange in the first place is that we don't want to believe that the devil can have fun too. There was a man evil enough that he could order the deaths of thousands and then go get a video game for his kid like it didn't even happen. It's not something we want to think about. And to be honest, it's not something that I want to think about either. Where is my bin Laden zip file? Oh, there it is. That is going in the trash. Finally.